There are moments in a life that do not announce themselves as turning points. They arrive dressed as ordinary trouble, a broken wheel, a hot afternoon, a road that has run out of give. And only later, looking back, does a person understand that everything changed in the 10 minutes they spent kneeling in the dust beside a stranger's wagon. This is the story of Nola Vane and of a Tuesday in August that she almost let pass without stopping. Stay with me, because what began with a cracked wheel spoke, and a woman who had nothing left to spare ended with something neither of them had expected to find in the wide, indifferent country of the frontier west. Nola was 22 years old, and she had been walking for 4 hours when she saw the wagon. She had left the town of Gila Flats that morning, under circumstances she preferred not to dwell on. The man who had employed her as a cook and housekeeper for the past 3 months, a cattle buyer named Foss, who operated out of a building that was technically a hotel, had decided on the Monday of that week that her wages were negotiable in ways she had not agreed to, and that her refusal to negotiate made her a problem he could solve by locking the supply room where her belongings were stored and telling her she could collect them when she was more reasonable. She had not been reasonable. She had gone through the window of the supply room at 5 in the morning while Foss was still asleep, taken her flour sack and her $11 from the tobacco tin, and walked out the back of Gila Flats in the dark without looking behind her. She had enough money for a stage ticket to Deming, where her aunt had written to say there might be work at the laundry. But the stage did not run until Thursday, and she was not willing to spend 2 more days in a town where Foss would be looking for a reason to make her situation more difficult. So she was walking. The road was free, and her feet were still good, and she had long since learned to convert stubbornness into forward motion. She was not a large woman. She was slight in the way of people who have not always had enough to eat, with dark gold hair that the August heat had frizzed loose from its braid, hazel eyes that people tended to underestimate and then regret underestimating, and a jaw that held its line with the particular quiet determination of someone who has been knocked down enough times to have learned how to fall without staying down. She was, by any measure, a woman at the end of her resources, and she was beautiful in the unassuming, almost accidental way that belongs to people who have never thought to wonder whether they are, fine-featured and sun-warm, with high cheekbones and a straight nose, and the kind of face that the frontier made more striking rather than less. The softness burned away, and something fiercer and more honest left behind. The road was red dirt and silence, and the occasional creosote bush throwing a shadow too thin to matter. The August sun did not negotiate. She had drunk the last of her water an hour ago, and she was thinking, with the careful arithmetic of someone who has done this kind of thinking before, about how far $11 would go if the laundry work came through, when she came around the long, shallow bend in the road and saw the wagon. The wagon was tilted at the edge of the road, where the hardpan gave way to a shallow ditch. One rear wheel cracked clean through at the spoke junction. A large grey horse stood in the traces with the philosophical patience of an animal that had long since concluded that human difficulties were not its problem. Beside the wagon, crouched in the dust, examining the damage with an expression of controlled frustration, was a man. He was not what she expected from a man alone on the Deming road with a wagon that size. He was perhaps 40, lean and weathered in the way of men who spend their lives outdoors by choice rather than necessity, with dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of sun-lined face that some men acquire through hardship, and others through a great deal of time spent looking at things they find worth looking at. His clothes were good, not showy but well made, the kind that lasted, and his hands, when he turned the broken spoke over in them, were the hands of a man who knew how to use them. Later she would learn that Thaddeus Crane was the largest private landowner in 3 counties, that he ran more cattle than most men in the territory had ever seen in one place, and that the broken wagon had happened precisely because he had insisted on driving himself rather than sending a hand, which was a habit that had annoyed his foreman for 15 years. She did not know any of that yet. She saw a man with a broken wheel and a problem she recognized and knew how to address. She stopped. "The spoke junction's gone," she said. "You'll need to redistribute the load before you try to move it, or you'll lose the whole wheel." He looked up at her. He had dark eyes, steady and assessing, with the quality of a man accustomed to making quick and accurate judgments about situations and people. He looked at her the way he looked at the broken wheel, not dismissively, but with the full attention of someone trying to understand what he was working with. "You know wagon repair?" he said. "I know what happens when you don't do it right," she said. "My father ran a freight operation out of Tucson until I was 16. I've seen 3 wheels go this way. The load needs to come off the right side before you brace it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and said, "Show me." What followed was 40 minutes of practical sweating work in the full August heat. Nola directed the redistribution of the wagon's load: sacks of grain, 2 crates of hardware, a rolled canvas tarp, while Thaddeus lifted and shifted with the efficient strength of a man who had not always had people to do his lifting for him. She found a length of iron banding in the wagon bed, left from some previous repair, and showed him how to use it as a temporary brace across the cracked junction. It would not hold forever. The wheel needed a proper wheelwright, but it would hold long enough to reach Deming without further damage. When it was done, they were both coated in red dust, and the grey horse had grown bored and begun eating the scrub grass at the road's edge. Thaddeus Crane looked at the braced wheel with the expression of a man who had just learned something he had not expected to need to know. He turned and looked at Nola. "Where are you headed?" he said. "Deming," she said. "My aunt has work for me." He looked at the flour sack on her back. He looked at the road ahead, which was long and empty and shimmering in the afternoon heat. He looked at her boots, which were beginning to show the morning's miles in ways that boots were not meant to show. "Get in the wagon," he said. "I'm going through Deming." She studied him for a moment, the assessing look she gave to most offers, which were not always what they appeared, and he returned it without flinching, without performing anything. He was simply a man who had just received substantial assistance and was offering a direct equivalent in return. She got in the wagon. The road to Deming was another 3 hours, and they spent most of it in the companionable silence of 2 people who were both more comfortable with work than with talk. But talk came eventually, the way it does on long roads, slowly, in pieces, each piece earning the next. She told him about the freight operation in Tucson, about her father's death 2 years prior, about the jobs that had followed and failed through no particular fault of her own. He listened in the way he did everything, fully, without interruption, with the quality of attention that made people feel afterward that what they had said had been worth saying. He told her little about himself, but what he said was accurate. He had a ranch, the Crane Spread, east of Deming, 40,000 acres and more cattle than he could count without help. He had built it from a single land claim filed 20 years ago by a young man who had nothing but a horse, a surveyor's map, and a stubbornness that had outlasted everything the territory could put in front of it. "What do you need in Deming?" he asked. "Work," she said. "My aunt knows the woman who runs the laundry." He went quiet again, with that particular quality of quiet that meant he was thinking rather than waiting. By the time Deming appeared on the horizon, pale and low against the late afternoon sky, he had come to a decision. He left her at her aunt's house with a handshake and a civil good evening, and he went to find the wheelwright. And he did not tell her what he had decided, because he was not certain yet that it was the right decision, and Thaddeus Crane had a lifelong habit of not speaking until he was certain. The wagon arrived the next morning. It came up the street at 8 o'clock, driven by a young ranch hand, and behind it walked a second horse, a chestnut mare, sound and well-fed, with a new saddle on her back. In the wagon bed, a month's worth of staple provisions, a good wool blanket, a set of proper tools, and a sealed letter. Nola read the letter on her aunt's porch with the morning light coming in warm over the Deming rooftops. The letter was brief. Thaddeus Crane wrote the way he spoke, directly, without ornament. He wrote that the Crane spread required a bookkeeper and supply manager, that the position paid a fair wage with room and board, and that the work would suit someone who understood freight logistics and was not afraid of a large operation. He wrote that the provisions and the horse were advance payment for the wheel repair, which had saved him a half-day's delay and a ruined axle. He wrote that the position was hers if she wanted it, and that he would expect an answer within the week, and that if she chose not to take it, he wished her well at the laundry, and meant it. There was a postscript. It said, "The mare's name is Juniper, and she is easier to handle than she looks." Nola folded the letter carefully. She looked at the mare. She looked at the wagon and the pale morning sky over Deming, and she thought about laundry work. And she thought about 40,000 acres of open range and a ledger that needed keeping. She wrote her answer that afternoon and sent it back with the hand. She said yes. The Crane spread was everything Thaddeus had not particularly described and more. Vast and functional, run by a foreman named Hicks who had 15 years of accumulated opinions and the patience of a man who had outlasted every change the ranch had seen. Hicks received Nola with the professional skepticism of someone who had seen promising hires come and go, and revised his opinion entirely within the first week, when she identified a 6-month discrepancy in the supply accounts that had been costing the operation $200 a quarter without anyone noticing. She worked hard in the way she had always worked, with precision and without complaint, and with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has found a problem the right size for her abilities. When she learned the operation the way she had learned wagon repair, by looking at what was broken and understanding what it needed. The Crane spread was large enough that there was always something that needed understanding. A supply route that was costing more than it should, a vendor whose invoices did not add up, a pattern in the cattle losses that nobody had thought to map against the seasonal water sources. Nola mapped it. She wrote it down in the clear, unhurried hand of a woman for whom accuracy was both a professional standard and a form of self-respect. Hicks, who had expected to outlast her the way he had outlasted several other attempts at organization, found himself instead referring visitors to the supply office and deferring on questions of logistics to someone 20 years his junior, with an unerring instinct for where money was leaking out of the operation. Thaddeus watched this from the distance that was his natural operating range. He was not a man who hovered. He asked good questions at the end of each week, listened to the answers in full, and modified his operations accordingly. He was a man who had built everything he had by being willing to learn from anyone who knew something he did not, a quality the territory's other large landowners had notably failed to develop, to their considerable and documented cost. He was also, though neither of them was in any hurry to discuss it, a man who found reasons to be in the supply office more often than the supply office strictly required his presence. It was Hicks who noticed first, because Hicks noticed everything. "You know he drove that wagon himself because he wanted to look at the eastern fence line without anyone knowing," Hicks said one morning in October, ostensibly examining a grain delivery. "Hasn't driven himself anywhere in 10 years. Road takes him past where the trouble's been with the Alderman boundary." Nola kept her eyes on the ledger. "That's interesting," she said. "Thought you'd find it so," said Hicks, and went back to the grain. By November, the supply accounts were running clean. By December, Thaddeus had offered a permanent position, which she accepted. By February, on an evening when the first cold had come down from the hills, and the stove was doing its best work, and they were both ostensibly reviewing the spring supply order, he said something that was not about the supply order at all. She answered it. And they were married in April, in a small ceremony at the Deming courthouse, attended by her aunt and Hicks, and 3 ranch hands who had won a bet about the timing. Juniper was stabled outside and could be heard commenting periodically on the proceedings. The Crane's spread flourished in the years that followed, not because Thaddeus Crane was less capable than he had been, but because capability and precision, when they work together, produce something that neither produces alone. The supply accounts stayed clean. The cattle operation expanded to a 5th county. The eastern boundary dispute with the Alderman family was resolved through the kind of meticulous documentation that Nola had made her speciality, entirely in the Crane's favor. On hot August afternoons, when the dust on the Deming road rose in pale columns against the wide sky, and Nola Crane sometimes thought about a flour sack and a broken wheel and the 10 minutes she had almost let pass without stopping. She was glad she had stopped. It is worth remembering, when the road is long and the resources are nearly gone and the heat makes every step a negotiation, that kindness offered in difficulty is not wasted. It does not vanish into the dust. It finds its way back, sometimes in the form of a fair letter and a chestnut mare with an easy disposition, sometimes in the form of a life that looks nothing like the laundry work you were walking toward, and everything like the thing you had not yet learned to want. The frontier was wide and hard, and did not apologize for either. But it was also, on occasion, the kind of country where a woman with nothing left to spare could stop for a stranger and find that the stopping changed everything.